Hello and welcome to our last hangout for this run of the Animal Behaviour and Welfare MOOC. You may have noticed that we did advertise that we would have Nat with us, but she's running a little bit late, so she will join us later. On this, the very last hangout of the run, we're just going to sort of go over some of the questions that you've been posting in the forums, any of the other points that we felt sort of had come up several times, and as always, you can use the questions and answers app, which I think is on your left, which would be, I'm never sure how it works. No. But if you click on the questions and answers app, you'll be able to ask us questions live as well. So with all that being said, Fritha, what questions did we like today?
Right, well, we had lots of questions in the week 6 hangout, and I've made a wee list of them here. Just to say also, I really enjoyed the discussion just in general this week. We talked about all sorts of things. Things that we'd maybe think we were quite surprised at talking about from the very beginning. So, for example, the best way to kill a chicken wasn't necessarily what we'd expect to be discussing by this point, but it's been really good, and I think in general everybody proceeds in a professional manner, and that is something that we think is very beneficial to everybody's learning as well, because people are coming from different backgrounds, so it's really nice to see that that we can all communicate and get on and share some information, and people have brought some things to us that we didn't know about, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's always great when people are sort of, like you say, sharing information, sharing links to things that they found that were useful, and also sharing their experiences as well. I think particularly for the week 4 that we were doing, when somebody was bringing in up all of the language that we use that we don't think twice about, which really is something that's made me sort of reevaluate a lot of how I communicate this science to other people. So I love doing this.
I will always think of a milking parlour again now as a front room parlour with sofas and, you know, nice comfortable positions for
maybe
cows.
Some teacups.
Few teacups, exactly. Anyway, to go back to the questions of this week's hangouts. So, well, we had quite a few and then some lovely comments. So thanks for everybody for all their lovely comments. Well, should we make a start with killing chickens, or is that going to put everybody off?
Let's dive in there with the chicken slaughter.
So Celia, lovely Celia, thank you very much for your nice comments. She was talking about low atmospheric pressure stunning.
Now, describe this to me, because I think I only have a very basic understanding of what low atmospheric pressure stunning is.
To be honest, so do I, in as much as I haven't gone into the research in the full depth of things, but I do know the basic principle. So the idea is that you have birds in a closed environment, and you remove the air as if you do in a vacuum, like a vacuum cleaner, and that reduces the air pressure inside. That then causes the birds to go into a period of hypoxia, and that eventually causes death. So it causes insensibility first and then death. Now, the good thing about that is that that type of hypoxia, the way that it is brought about, is not as aversive, or may not even be aversive at all, as putting them into a different gas mixture than normal air. So when we put birds or other animals into a carbon dioxide mixture, it's very, very aversive, and they try and escape it. They try and get out of the situation, and you can see that it's very aversive. It can be quite quick and over quite quickly, but at the same time, it's still an aversive.
Lots of behavioural measures of stress.
Exactly. Whereas in a low atmospheric situation, it seems that this isn't the case. We don't see the same behavioural measures of stress. We don't see the same escape attempts, and it's also reasonably quick, although not actually as quick as the gaseous stunning, but it seems that they go through different stages, and as I say, those stages don't seem to be as stressful, so that's really good. It's possible that to a certain level of just the insensibility, that it would be reversible as well, so it doesn't create a blood injury. And that would be important for possibly using it as a method of stunning for halal purposes, for example. So that would be also a plus. And the other good thing is that you can do it all the way to death. So then you don't have to have another process, as in an exsanguination, to cause death. And so you can do it in one go. One of the more beneficial aspects is that you don't actually have to remove the birds from the crates that they come in from the lorries. So they come in into the slaughterhouse in a lorry or a truck with crates, take those crates and put them directly into the low atmospheric pressure area. And that means they don't have to be put on the shackles, which can cause breakages, can cause bruising, can cause pain, and of course if the animals are up on the shackles for a long period of time, it can be very stressful for them. So in lots of ways that is much better. The research, although it actually has gone to commercial level, so there's quite a few places in the States now using this, the research there is still at an infancy. So I personally would like to see more research done on this before it was brought out in full commercial setup. But a lot of the commercial places in America that are doing it are keeping their methodology very closely under wraps, so that they may have done some research, but they're not publishing it because of commercial reasons, which is unfortunate to say the least. But I think there's an awful lot of evidence, I suppose, from different types of hypoxia that this is maybe the way forward for large-scale stunning and slaughter. And so I think it does have a lot of promise. So we'll see where we go from there. But as I say, I personally think more research is needed.
Yeah, we don't want to just be blanket recommending something based on a hunch. If there's anything that you've learned from this course, we want to have the evidence so that we can go forward in the best possible way for animal welfare. So excellent question, Celia. What else have we got that's...
Well, yes, so that's probably our only one on slaughter so far, which is probably a good thing. We'll get that out of the way just now. We have got, oh, I know, there was a question from Anonymous from Australia, who was asking about follow-up courses and also talking about the difference between welfare legislation and enforcement in the EU, different countries within the EU, and also in Australia, New Zealand, America, and elsewhere, of course, around the world. And we would like to acknowledge that, yes, there is a difference. Not that we're saying the EU or countries within the EU are perfect, by a long way from it, by no means, but that I suppose the good thing about the EU is that the majority of legislation has been based on evidence.
Yes.
And although there are a lot of commercial pressures, the evidence has taken forefront in producing that.
And they're very proactive about finding evidence as well.
Exactly.
They're very good at putting out calls for research proposals and awarding money to research proposals which are evaluated on their worthiness of that money on the basis of the science that they propose they're going to do. So they have this very science-based and rigorous method of then soliciting more research.
So yeah, absolutely. So that's great. There are obviously problems in the EU, we're not going to deny that. But and the main frustration, I think, for most people is that how long it takes to go from having a firm idea of the evidence of the science around a particular problem and then going all the way through to commercial changes. And you know, it's decades, it's a very long time indeed, so it's not that easy. But just to answer your question on terms of follow-up courses, Anonymous from Australia, well, we will be doing another run of this MOOC at some point. We're negotiating at the moment as to when that will be. We're also planning, and I don't know whether this is top secret information, but I'm going to release it anyway. But we are also planning to have an always open version of this course.
And that's something actually we might come and talk to you in the forums about and see, sort of gauge what your opinions on that, because if we're to open this up as a sort of always available online, either through YouTube or through Coursera, because Coursera are investigating this sort of always open platform as well. We'd be really interested to know what you would feel about having less interaction from us as the staff members. We feel that's quite important, but we possibly have a overinflated sense of our own importance. It has happened to me in the past.
So we try very hard when the course is running for how many weeks is it?
6 weeks now.
6 weeks. We try very hard to maintain some presence on the discussion board, obviously these hangouts, but we wouldn't be able to do that in an open access version. Hello, Nat. Come and join us. there she is. So we were just talking about follow-up courses. So we were saying that we're going to run this again. So there may be little bits of extra material we put on the next one, but obviously quite a lot of material will stay the same. And then there's this possibility of doing some kind of always open course. But we would be interested in knowing how people would interact with that if we all weren't able to do these hangouts, do the discussion boards and all those things.
So one of the suggestions from our Edinburgh team was that we would perhaps do every 2 months we'd do a large hangout and sort of summarize some of the various questions. So we'll come and talk to you about that in the forums, and you can share your ideas with us whether or not you think that would work, or if it just couldn't possibly work without us. And don't feel afraid to say that.
Is this a question up here?
No, it's a question from the hangout, from the list.
But we do have questions coming in.
And then and I'll look back just to sort of finish off my question. There are quite a lot of other courses that she could do in Australia, and I would particularly recommend her going and looking at the Animal Welfare Science Centre at the University of Melbourne, because they do a lot of courses that might suit her in her area. And of course, they're also based on science, which is what I really like.
Indeed.
So,
yes, so apologies for being late. I was on a Skype. It's amazing, this world. Skype with South America, where we're planning to visit in a few weeks actually, and run some various different courses. So if anyone is watching this and they happen to be in South America, in Chile, then let us know. We'll be there at the beginning of May.
Yes, we will.
So, so I've sort of just sketched out a list here. Yes. So, okay, what about this one? So Kathy asked, she said, you know, it's what I can see that you guys are doing some good stuff out there to help promote animal welfare, and there's lots of people who work in non-governmental organisations and that sort of thing. But she was wondering, what can she do as, you know, a member of the public? I think she was in the States as well. What can she do to help animal welfare and help the cause of animal welfare? What would best could she do?
Yeah. Do you know, we get asked this quite a lot, and it's always interesting, because I suppose people assume that it's only scientists and, you know, people like us who have a specific job that's related to animal welfare. But the reality is that, you know, animal welfare is very much about humans doing things, or attitudes being changed because of people's knowledge and preparedness, I suppose, to disseminate that knowledge. So all I would say is, if you, I mean, I'm sure you're doing lots and lots of things anyway, but if you want to do something that's going to help in the long term to improve animal welfare and people's perception of what animal welfare is, I would suggest that you talk about it. And that you make good decisions around your use of animals, the way that you keep your pets, and you challenge people in a nice way, not in a horrible way, but you challenge people's thinking by being prepared to say, well, actually, I've done some reading on this, or I've, you know, listened to some people talking about this on a MOOC, and this is the fact. This is the fact, not what our opinion is, but this is what we know from the research that's been done. So I would say that's a good step towards creating a universal language that means that we are all looking at animals in a very similar way, regardless of our culture, our language, and, you know, and our backgrounds.
Yeah, and I think as well for members of the public, if you can sort of try and remember that this is a science. We have evidence with us, and we're looking at the evidence. We do this in an objective and scientific manner. And I think maybe many members of the public don't recognise how much of animal welfare is based in science and how science can tell us about animal welfare. So just getting that message across sometimes is enough.
Yeah. So that was a good question.
Yeah, great question.
Well, should we try and take some from the side here? People are getting excited now. That's brilliant. Shall I pick the ethics one?
This one from Rio.
Yeah,
because that's been there for a while.
So Rio has asked, it's interesting to see that in the Animal Ethic Dilemma website, in the profile result, she turned out to be 87% utilitarian. I'm quite sure that my view is very similar to what we've been learning in the MOOC. Are animal welfarists considered utilitarian?
Yes. Is the answer. So I think I covered this in the first sort of week's worth of lectures when we talked about what is being utilitarian. And I think there's a general recognition that animal welfare scientists are going to be more utilitarian, just because in order to do the science that relates to different animal welfare issues, there's almost a kind of there's an acceptance. Doesn't mean you agree, but there's an acceptance that we farm animals, that we use animals in research, that there are animals in zoos. So yeah, so I would say that animal welfare scientists, their profile will tend to be more utilitarian.
It wouldn't mean that we would be 100%.
No.
And
in fact,
certain values, exactly, we're all going to hold certain values towards certain animals, certain species, and it does change over time.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether, so those people who did do the animal ethics dilemma, you may have just done one case. I think you were asked to do 2 or 3.
There was a little bit of confusion, I think, as to what exactly the purpose of the website is. It's not like a sort of a personality test where you can just go online and go, oh, I'm a utilitarian. It's to help demonstrate to you how that you can do these 12 questions, and this will come up with a profile. But when you work through the cases, as the different cases will present you with different challenges, you might not always go with what your profile suggests, because we respond to cases in different ways. So it's very important to work through the cases while you're on that website
and recognize the difference.
Because we had a big discussion, I think, on one of the discussion boards about the dog euthanasia case and how people were trying to save the dog by choosing different decisions. That's not quite what it's all about, but it was more to try and show you how your values make a difference in what your decision-making processes can be. And that, of course, is important for your food buying decisions that you make, for the things that you do with your pets, for all of the interactions, whether we decide to go out to the zoo with the kids or any of these things can are all based on ethical decisions, but also decisions about all different aspects of our lives, but they're all interplay. So you might be utilitarian most of the time, but have a particular dislike for zoos, for example, and you might think that wild animals should be in a different way. And so
it's very personal, isn't
exactly, it's very personal. And as you say, it can change over time.
And it does, indeed. Okay, well, that was a good one. Thank you, Ria. And then we'll carry on with the same theme then with Jasmine.
So Jasmine asks, or she points out that almost no one who posted their results came up with the contractarian viewpoint, which I actually was, I think, 8% contractarian at one point. What would a contractarian view look like?
Yeah, well, I think the fact that most of us didn't come up with a huge amount of contractarianism suggests that perhaps being contractarian slips into some of the other definitions. And so, I mean, it's not something that I'm that familiar with, I have to be honest.
I think on the website, the example they give is the contractarian is likely to say things like, we have to take care of this production animals' welfare because our consumers expect a high level of welfare. So it's not so much putting the value on the animal's experience so much as the general social contract that we have with everyone to provide a generally good experience. I don't know if that's the best way of explaining it.
I mean, that would be an element of the utilitarian view, which is, it's just, I suppose it's just taking out the animal. It's basically saying, you know, yes, it's about being a utilitarian, but it's about being utilitarian in relation specifically to the end person who's going to gain.
It's less about measuring the costs and benefits. It's more about understanding the good of the, you know, the majority. So, you know, you're not thinking so much about the costs, I suppose.
But I think it's very much about humans.
It is. Oh, no, it's absolutely about humans. And in fact, in human philosophy, it's far more widely used. But of course, when we're dealing with animals, we're not dealing with people with people. We're not dealing with moral agents as such. They can't make their own ethical decisions, or we think they can't make their own ethical decisions. And so it's a slightly different way of having to think about it. You're putting on you're imposing a moral view onto the animal rather than the other way around.
I mean, what's interesting about the ethical dilemma, you know, this is a great sort of resource, but what you find is that it was designed in the UK. It's quite Eurocentric. It doesn't necessarily include the ethical views that might be related to different parts of the world. You know, some of the things that actually I don't know very much about, but I know that, you know, someone had made the comment when we were in China and we were using this actually as a tool in China, that it didn't really relate a huge amount to some of the other views that were out there. So
yeah.
I think, you know, to recognize that it is just one tool, it's an interesting one. It just shows you how much your views change when you're faced with different scenarios. But I would say that we're probably missing quite a whole load of different ethical viewpoints.
Yeah.
I was actually talking to one of the people who was instrumental in setting up the website a few months ago, and they were saying they were thinking about having to tweak it somewhat and add in some more Eastern philosophy as well.
Yeah, they should.
So we'll see.
If they do that. But I think you can put your own cases in it.
Yes, you can.
So, you know, there's a possibility there.
But yeah, it's been around for a few years now, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The Animal Ethics Dilemma site.
Okay, we'll just deal with Chiara's.
So Chiara asks, will there be any programs in South Africa, fingers crossed, or do we have any suggestions for further study there?
Well, interesting, you should talk about this. I was in a meeting the other day about South Africa, and the University of Edinburgh is quite interested in developing more of their relationships just generally in Africa. We have got some good ones. And certainly our vet school, the clinical side of things, have good collaborations with universities in South Africa. But there recently, a couple of our colleagues, one of them you may well have met and a lady called Françoise Wemmelsfelder, she gave an interview, I think, in week 2. And she was out in Ethiopia working with a vet school, in a young vet school in Ethiopia, and alongside the Donkey Sanctuary and another couple of NGOs. And what they were interested in doing was learning about the use of QBA, or qualitative behavioural assessment, in Ethiopia, amongst the different lecturers who are working in the vet school, as well as obviously the field workers working with the NGO, the animal welfare charity. And increasingly we're seeing more of those collaborations where you're seeing a local university in Africa, a vet school very often, that's very keen to help work with the local animal welfare organisations that are international animal welfare organisations. And they themselves are also interacting with a number of other universities, you know, in different parts of the world, and you're starting to see these really good collaborations happening. And out of that, it's a long way of saying it, but out of that will come what we call CPD opportunities, continuing professional development opportunities, for people who are living and working in that area of Africa, because they will be supported, because in fact they can be supported. But I think we're at the early stages, because there's not a huge number of people in Africa who have that kind of you know, capability, I suppose, in animal welfare science.
Yeah. That just sort of leads on to a question from the board, actually. So maybe we could just answer that as well. So Tamsin, hello Tamsin, you've been very active on the boards. It's really nice to be able to speak to you and answer your question directly. Asking about collaborations with other universities. So she was taking the example of the Animal Welfare Indicators Project, of course, which we at SRUC have been very heavily involved in because we run it. And there was 12 different partners from all over Europe, but also included Brazil. And obviously those types of projects are very collaborative, and we have to go out and meet with people from different countries, carry out research, sort of partnered research. So we'll have somebody doing something on sheep in Spain, and we'll do the same thing on sheep in Scotland, and you know, be looking at the differences and the similarities between these countries. So that's really important. But of course we do lots of different types of collaborations as well. So I was wondering if you wanted to say something about the Jean Marchik Centre and what you've been doing there.
Okay, so as you know, the Jean Marchik Centre has been based here in Edinburgh for the last 4 years. And over those 4 years, we've spent quite a lot of time. We already had very good connections anyway from Edinburgh to lots of different colleagues overseas. But what we have spent time doing is specifically building our relationships with universities and governments and animal welfare organisations and research institutes, working within China, and which is why this MOOC this time round has been translated into Mandarin. So subtitled, yes. And also in India, we've been doing a lot of work in India. We've worked in Thailand, Taiwan, Vietnam recently, and anyway, lots of different parts of the world. And now we're going over to South America, and we're starting to really develop our links in places like Chile and Brazil. So the idea, the remit for the Marching Centre is really about networking and collaboration, and trying to help other parts of the world to, first of all, teach their veterinary students, who we see as being the kind of front line when it comes to animal welfare. They're not always as well educated about animal welfare science as they should be, but we're trying to help other universities by partnering with them to develop their curriculum and think about how they deliver any kind of veterinary education, so that the message that animals are important, that it's a privilege to use them as part of their of your education as a vet, and that your role as a vet is to be an animal ambassador. All of those sorts of messages we try to get within the veterinary curriculum. So we churn out brilliant vets who are also extremely aware of the importance of their role in animal welfare. But we also work with governments to try to promote the message that international animal welfare is a massively growing, important area of concern for governments, and that, you know, trying to sort of establish good international standards for animal welfare, and making sure the legislation and so on is line, all of those sorts of things we do quite a lot with. And then we help with capacity building around research as well. We try to partner as much as possible. So we've just spent some time, as I say, in India. We've now signed a very good agreement, high-level government agreement, with the Indian Council for Agricultural Research around production animal research, that involves the Rosman Institute here, involves the SRUC, and also involves the veterinary school at Edinburgh. And the idea behind that is that, yes, a lot of the research will be about production animals and breeding and so on, but actually underlying that, underpinning that, will always be animal welfare, and the, you know, the kind of key elements of making sure that not only the research animals, you know, are kept well and that people understand about their welfare, but the outcomes for the production sort of endpoints are also related back to animal welfare. So we kind of do it in a partnering way, as you can see, and there's a lot of work going on.
Well, and also we have a large number of students here, both the veterinary undergraduates, but also our postgraduates from our master's programs, and they carry out their research projects all over the world, often partnered with other institutions, non-governmental organisations, and also universities. So, you know, we have students out in Indonesia, we have students out in Australia, we have students all, well, basically everywhere.
And so, you're all our students as well.
Exactly. Now you're our new cohort students.
And it's fabulous. I mean, I was in London just yesterday or the day before, and I happened to be in a meeting of a charity, and somebody I didn't know, who was fairly new to that charity, came up and said how wonderful it was to be part of the MOOC and part of the community of learners, and how they were going about their learning, because they were all coming together in the office after hours, I think, to go through the process of learning and going, you know, and how did they get on, and fitting it around their work and things. And it was absolutely fabulous to, you know, you meet people all the time who, you know, are part of this student group, and I know that this student group will go out and do just as much for animals as the students who we have directly interacting with us every day, either online or on our on-campus programs.
So that's all good.
Yeah, so thank you, Tamsin, for that.
Yeah. I don't know whether you want to choose another one from this list or from
well, I wonder if we should go on to Michelle's question. So Michelle asked a really interesting question, which does sort of lead on from what we were just talking about in trying to create animal welfare teaching. So Michelle asks, when we use animals in teaching, can we use non-animal alternatives for teaching? And I'd just like to share a little story first of all. I did a zoology degree some years ago now, and in our very first year we had a lab where we had a rat dissection. Now, I am the kind of person who very much likes to be told I'm doing well by my teachers, and we were offered the opportunity to not do this rat dissection if we felt there was a welfare problem. I, at the time, didn't feel capable of saying, no, I don't want to do this rat dissection because I wanted to be seen as a good student. And a lot of what we do here in Edinburgh now is we try to create a culture of care where the students are taught to recognise the welfare of the animals from the very beginning. And we do this with these guys. So we are huge investors in non-animal and non-living alternatives. So that's the reduction and replacement from the 3 Rs, so that students can practice their clinical skills on beasties like this rather than on animals. And they can also practice things like animal handling skills. So you can see for Nat's one here, I think this one's great as a teaching resource because this has a clamp, first off, sorry for the a clamp where you can put it onto a desk. You can see this balloon in the back. So this is for intubation, which is where you put a hollow tube down into the trachea where the air is, and you can see you're doing it correctly if the balloon inflates. So that's something that you wouldn't get if you were trying to practice this skill on a real animal. You
Thankfully.
Well, yeah, you know, you wouldn't be able to see. And intubation is a tricky skill. Quite often people will intubate and they'll go down into the esophagus instead. So this is a really good example of how these mannequins can actually be much better as a teaching tool than actually the animals.
Some of you might be familiar with these, especially if you trained in veterinary schools where these sorts of bits of equipment were available. They're quite expensive, some of them, but actually this one here, which is doing the same thing, so again, little bit here for intubation. This thing was designed and made in, how was it made? In Thailand, by a professor of anatomy there. And he makes lots of these different things, and they can be made very cheaply. So, you know, even though we've got some quite high sort of level mannequins and models here, it is possible to make these things in-house.
One of the things, so this one, for example, has a detachable module here where these can be cut into and replaced and changed, and you can take the module and put new modules in. But again, these are very expensive. So other universities are developing ways of trying to do this more cheaply as well.
So this is for actually practicing spaying on bitches. I mean, actually, to be honest with you, I think this is quite a large, heavy thing.
This is really heavy.
Keep this here, but a lot of the other ones we can actually carry with us. So this is Fluffy.
Yes, I love Fluffy. Fluffy is
very well.
Fluffy evokes a very emotional response in me, let me say.
Yeah. So again, I mean, you know, Fluffy is designed so that you can do intubation, but you can also, these things here are all about doing, you know, some different sorts of techniques that involve, I don't know what this bit does, but that involve, you know, that you can actually take blood, you can put blood through them, you can, I mean, you can use, and in fact, we've got another one that actually has got loads of heart rate sounds, so you can actually practice listening to heart rates. I mean, these are, the numbers of different models that are on the market now is incredible, just because vet schools are starting to buy them and use them.
But it's not just these small animals either, of course, she says, clicking the dog. It's also larger animals. So we have a whole cow's bottom, backside, which has a calf in it, in the uterus, which you can then practice carving. You can have exactly, you can put the calf in the wrong way so that it would be difficult then to get out, and so you can get vet students or animal science students or whatever to practice with that.
I thought we had a picture of that on one of our
unfortunately it's too big to fit in this room, and it's also very heavy because the calf is the same weight as a normal calf, so it's about 40 kilos. There's a horse, which is great, so that our vet students who aren't going to go into equine practice don't have to do endless practicing on live horses, so they can use our model horse to practice all the reproduction and other sort of techniques that they would use in clinics without using real horses.
We treat these reproductions well, because you sort of want to as well engender in the students that how to handle animals and how to treat the animals in a respectful manner as well. So you very often see when people are doing procedures on these, they start to stroke them and try to keep them calm as best as possible.
And finally, we've got more. You can see we're very keen on all of this. And then we have these sorts of things here. And again, I mean, there are various ways of making these so that they're not quite so expensive. But again, I mean, this is all about, you know, raising a vein, being able to take blood, use the needle properly. And then even if you find that a little bit too squeamishy, then these are pads that do exactly the same. So we can actually put blood, well, false blood, into these, and students can learn how to use their needles correctly here as well.
I love that the company for this one is called Limbs and Things. Just every time I see it, it makes me giggle.
So the whole point of this is not just because we like having plastic things.
And of course, there's
about
more
us.
and more computer simulations as well, which are very useful, and reduce the amount of animal use even further. Vet students do need to use animals.
Yeah.
We do need to use animal bodies to be able to do full anatomy and all of those sort of things. But we've also mentioned on some of the boards earlier this week about the way in which we do that. So the way in which we have bodies donated to us from the veterinary
all about being
practice,
ethical
and trying to not have animals bred specifically for teaching.
Yeah. We are sitting in absolutely beautiful buildings. This is the Royal Dick Vet School building, and this whole building has been designed so that students are able to observe one another when there is a case that's interesting that's come in. We've got big open galleries where students can come in and observe what's happening. We've got ways of, we have a 3D printer, which we can take CT scans of anything like an unusual fracture. If we've got a CT scan of an animal, we can actually replicate this in 3D printed form. We don't have anything 3D printed in there, because we've got, we do have this amazing comparison of a pug skull and a greyhound skull in 3D printed form, which is just a brilliant teaching tool.
and we've just started to look at other techniques that allow us to make better use of the bodies that have been donated. So anyway, I mean, we could go on for a while, but
we like all this topic.
It's all part of the process of really making sure that we are very ethical about how we teach, but also making sure that our students really do understand the value of animals, because we do know from the research that veterinary students, unfortunately, when they are expected to use animals as part of their education, and that message of their welfare and the importance of animals isn't integrated in the teaching, that vet students do become, I would say, slightly deadened to, they become less empathetic as they go through their programme. And whilst, of course, we need them to be able to detach sufficiently to be able to do their job, not to become so emotional that it overwhelms them and they can't do their jobs. Equally, we need them to keep that empathy, because that is actually part of being a good vet and good to people as well as animals. So anyway, that's hopefully answered that question.
We just wanted to show off our toys.
Well, and also these have been all over the world, and obviously we occasionally get quite interesting questions at customs, but other than that, they're really useful as a tool to help vet schools all around the world to improve their practices on clinical skills and understanding that they, as you say, it's a privilege to use animals and not a right.
Education, yes.
So we've got a couple of other questions here. We've got the question on this one. I don't know if you want to try and answer these.
From Nazar. Nazar asks, thank you for promoting animal welfare message around the world. I'm a veterinarian, can't say it, and living in a developing country. The bad news is that this country, there's no sufficiently equipped veterinary clinics to perform basic veterinary practice.
Tricky one to answer,
really. It is a tricky one to answer, especially when we've just been showing off all of our fancy, expensive models.
Yeah, but now let's start from the beginning, because I think this is a really interesting question. We get this quite often. As I said, we work in lots of different parts of the world, and a lot of them are developing countries. And whenever we go to the clinics within the vet schools, very often, the clinics will be very proud to show us smart equipment that they've been able to afford. Often the vets there haven't really had the training in how to use them. But if they have, that's fine. But they then often don't think about the wider implications of using that treatment or that piece of equipment on the animals and the impact that that might have on their welfare. And I'll give you a good example, is that we were visiting a very nice veterinary hospital in a developing part of the world. And whilst there, we were shown by the clinicians, very proudly actually, their new oncology unit, cancer unit for animals. Now, there's a lot of ethical issues around cancer treatment for animals, because obviously you are putting the animals through quite a process in order to try to prolong their life to a certain extent. And so before actually, we have an oncology unit here, but we do have a quality of life assessment that goes alongside any treatment plan or proposal. And that's very important for very invasive treatments like oncology, where the animal is likely to feel much sicker before it's likely to get any benefit from the treatment. And what was upsetting really for us was that the equipment was there, the ability to treat the animal was there, but that meant that all animals were being treated without that kind of quality of life ethical assessment taking place, the responsible veterinary care. So I think that happens too. So it's not just about not having basic equipment, it's also about having sometimes too fancier equipment and not the basic skills or knowledge or training to be able to think about when that equipment should be used. So that concerns me quite a bit.
There's also the problem with different drugs being available in different countries, aren't there? And often we, and I'm talking about the wider we, perhaps in the Western world, go ahead and make some educational resources, which are all well and good, but they are based on drugs that we're able to get here in Europe, say, and they are
protocols
protocols that are available here, and they are very much based on European or North American practices. And I'm just wondering if we get this one here. I'm going to this is the one you're looking for.
Yeah, that one.
So we try to move away from that from our own point of view to focus on the basics of veterinary management, and we've got a little DVD here, which I don't know if you can see that, but that is for dog and cat clinical management and care in China particularly, so it's been translated into Mandarin. But the idea behind this was to A, use Chinese situations, to B, focus on the issues that they have most prominently, and C, only use the drugs and techniques that are available in China. There's no point talking about the drugs that we could use here, for example, that are illegal sometimes, or not available, or too expensive. So they have to be done within the means and availability of the country. And I think that's the thing that that would maybe sort of try and answer some of your question there, Nasa, in thinking about ways in which the veterinary clinic can be equipped to perform basic, good clinical practice. And that might be only within the means that are available within that country.
But I also think that, Nasa, I think you've also asked another question about international support or funding to help develop this sort of area. I think that the important thing is to make sure that the training for the vets is in place first in the developing countries, making sure that the best practice standards, that the basics, the actual basics, aren't missed. Sometimes they're less sort of sexy, if you like. Learning about basic husbandry, sterility, animal care in the clinic, those sorts of things. They tend to be less of less interest, and people get stuck into the technology and fancy diseases. But actually, the majority of animals, their welfare is problematic because of very basic things, and those basic things are easily dealt with as long as vets and if you have veterinary nurses or technicians are given the right training. So I think for me it's about training first, and then equipment and all the other things that you get within a clinic. And
that's across the board, isn't it? I mean, we've been working in India on projects in India, and colleagues here from the vet school have also been doing the same, going out and understanding what vets are saying to farmers, for example, and they're often very, very quick to treat or to use preventative medicines such as wormers without suggesting to the farmer that the environment in which the animal is kept in isn't suitable, so it's not clean enough, or that the farmer isn't ensuring that the baby animals get colostrum, for example, and those very, very simple and cheap changes could firstly save the farmer money because they don't have to pay for drugs or veterinary treatment for that matter, but also are much more effective in long-term health and welfare of the animals concerned, and also help increase production for those farmers which can be in very, very poor situations.
So I think, yeah, I mean, obviously we want vets to be able to treat animals and do their jobs well, but I think that we need to recognise that sometimes it's the simple things that have the biggest effect, and that hopefully has come across in the MOOC that we've put together. Is it's those simple things that if you get those right can have the biggest impact on animal welfare, and hopefully vets can promote those things by being very knowledgeable. What have we got here then? Okay, so again, should we try Alex?
So Alex asks, what could someone do to encourage the vet school they graduated from and to instill more empathy and welfare values in their students? A letter to the rector, maybe?
Yeah, well, actually, it depends on where you're from, but I think, you know, increasingly you're seeing the veterinary profession, the professional bodies within the countries taking a much greater leadership role in this. For example, in India, you've got the Veterinary Council of India. In China, you've got the Chinese Veterinary Medical Association. And obviously in America, you've got the American Veterinary Medical Association. And in different countries, we've got the RCVS. You know, different countries have different bodies that are the organising bodies for their profession. And I've seen increasingly that those bodies are taking you know, they're being empowered, if you like, to try to change things by setting some standards that are related to international standards. So one thing that you can do if you want to push your vet school to think about how they deliver veterinary education, and the fact that they might not have enough of what you consider to be an animal welfare related kind of mission, is to point them quite clearly to the fact that there is an OIE, which is the Animal Health Organization, the World Animal Health Organization, that they are very clear about vets needing to take a leadership role in animal welfare. They've also laid down a model curriculum now, and the day one skills and competencies for vets internationally include animal welfare. So you can make a really nice case that you can put together in a letter that you could send to the veterinary body, the organising body in your country, to sort of suggest that you know, they really need to be looking at animal welfare being part of all of the veterinary curricula across the country, and you'd like to know what they're doing about it. And equally, you can send a copy of that letter directly to your veterinary school, and I would send it to your dean or your rector, to you know, emphasise the fact that you believe that you've had a very nice education, thank you very much, but you would like them to perhaps look much more closely at how they're going to deliver this in the long term.
So I think Alex there has clarified that it's Central Europe, Hungary and Slovakia.
Well, then you're in a good space, because you know, there's some nice research that's coming out of Europe, and you know, looking specifically at farm animal welfare and how that's delivered in the different veterinary schools and animal science units. And that is actually the data that's been used to build this you know, this model veterinary curriculum. And so if you go on to the, what's it called?
The AWARE program. So that if you look for AWARE, animal welfare, oh gosh, in oh gosh, I can't remember.
Anyway, AWARE, look it up.
The extent. Oh gosh.
Anyway, whatever.
European countries.
It's a network.
Yes, it is a network. I really should remember it. But there's particularly good work coming out of the Czech Republic, actually, from Marek Sprinker and his colleagues there. So that's the person to really get in contact.
But also the veterinary curriculum, I think, is advertised now on the FVE website, which is the Federation of Vets for Europe.
Yeah.
So, and there's Nancy de Bern, who's the, I don't know, she's the chair, the secretary, the director of FVE. She's been extremely good at promoting this to vet schools and veterinary organisations within Europe. So, I mean, there are ways and means. I have to say it's not always the fastest, but, you know, we've seen massive changes happening within the Chinese Veterinary Medical Association, who now, you know, are promoting a national curriculum for veterinary science in China across the many hundreds of vet schools that there are there. And also the fact that animal welfare is going to be a key component. It will be examinable, and there's now an animal welfare textbook that has been written by university lecturers working at university vet schools in China. So, and that's happened within a 4 or 5 year period. So it's incredible. It is possible.
In fact, I wondered if we had the Indian one sitting up there, but I think it may be in your office, Nat.
Oh yes.
So we have textbooks everywhere in this office.
Yes, we do. Anyway, I'll do that later. Okay, any more here?
There's lots
then?
more questions coming
quite
through.
a few. Some of them are very deep questions.
I like Valerie's question. It's going back to the animal ethics website, but she asks, what does it mean if your animal ethics dilemma profile shows that you're split between several categories? Well, firstly, I would say is most of us are. Secondly, that you're a very well-rounded individual. And thirdly, that the whole point of the animal ethics dilemma page, remember, is not to say this is your profile and that's it forever, but also just to show you how your values can change in different situations. So I would suggest you go and do some of the case studies now. Now you've got your initial profile, go through those case studies and see how that changes your profile. And so it's not a be all and end all thing. It's not you're not fixed now in your profile. That's something that is very malleable over time.
Rio, just to answer your question, which is basically that the alternatives for teaching are great, but when do students start their hands-on practical training? The important thing for us is that obviously our students get a lot of exposure to animals as they go through their course, so it starts right from first year. We're quite lucky, all our students are now based on one campus where our farms and our vet clinics all are. So they're always surrounded by opportunities to work with animals. But the actual clinical skills training starts with the mannequins and the models, the videos and those sorts of things. Then the students also get access to handling skills using animals that are either within our dog and cat home, animals that are calm and easy to be around and don't get stressed. And we also sometimes use, the students' own animals if they're comfortable with that. But we have a charter about, basically how those animals are used, how they're monitored whilst they're being used, all those sorts of responsible things that you'd expect. But the students basically do a lot of their training through the clinics. So we do not have any animals that are here specifically for teaching, apart from some horses and cows that are in the farm. And those animals will be used mostly for handling. But the small animals, we don't have any of those specifically for teaching. I mean, dogs and cats. And the clinical side of things is done very much within the clinic. So when a case comes in, students will start off by observing, having practiced their clinical skills, on these models and mannequins, and then gradually they will start to do more and more as they go into their 4th and 5th year. By the end of this, their 5th year here is spent basically honing their skills, and they're working alongside extremely well qualified vets and are under supervision at all times. And then when they graduate, they're considered to be, very, very proficient at what they're doing.
And do we have, as Ria also asked at the end, do we have evidence from the students on what they think of the technology that we bring?
Yes, we do. We went to quite a lot of trouble to do some questionnaires with the students to see how effective they thought this sort of teaching was for them. And there's some quite nice little bits of research that show that the students feel a lot safer in this learning environment, that they can make mistakes without getting stressed about it, because obviously they're not dealing with a proper animal, which means that they can practice much more. So they're more confident when they do deal with the actual animal. So we found that they, where their skill needs to be honed, needs to be improved, that using the models and mannequins makes them more confident learners, but it also makes them better at it when they start doing it. In terms of knowledge, because a lot of the time animals are being used, as part of a practical, when in fact it's not about the kind of skills and hands-on stuff, it's about knowledge. And what we found when we use software, so we use computer-based model simulations or information sources, what we found then is that the students are actually performing at a higher level. Their exam marks are better because what we have done is focused on the knowledge and not actually kind of, diverted them, if you like, by worrying about the skill, if that's not what we're trying to examine at the time. So what I would say is it's important to think about what is it that you want the outcome to be when teaching. Is it about being able to do a hands-on skill, or is it about acquiring the knowledge and then applying that to being better at the hands-on skill? And I think that's the thing that needs to be unpicked.
That was a good question.
That was a very good question.
Yeah, it is.
Should we try this one?
Yeah.
So Ilyas has asked, Ilyas has noticed that applying animal welfare principles and assessments to our species seems to shed light to many current dubious human social practices and situations. Those correlations prompt to deeper cultural deficiencies as a cause of these issues. And what are our thoughts on that? It's a very deep question, Ilyas. On a Friday afternoon, I don't know if my brain's quite up to this, but I do have some quite strong feelings about this, and it's something that I do notice quite a lot in the forums. People get very despondent about the state of humanity because of the way that we as a whole treat animals, and I recognise why people do that. It's very depressing when you see this suffering, which often not a lot of people seem to care about. I tend to look at it the other way around, though. I love humanity. I love the fact that as a species we do care, and we care enough to create resources like these. We have a huge amount of our species' energy is put towards caring for other species, other animals that really do nothing for us, and yet we still care for them. So I don't like this very negative attitude that we have towards humans. I think we could always do better. But I much prefer to look at it from a more positive viewpoint and to praise the good that happens, and to help the people who aren't doing it well, help them to see how they can do it better. And maybe that's just how I keep saying.
Well, I think it's important not to be too judgmental. And I think there's a point at which, you see practices and you think, no, actually that is, from everything, the research, your awareness of animals, that's not appropriate, that is poor practice and it's unacceptable. And I think that, that's a point where you can say, you draw the line. But actually a lot of the other times, if you want to change things, you have to deal with it incredibly respectfully. There's, education and change doesn't happen overnight. I mean, the fact that, animal welfare is something, even in the UK, where I think we've got a very, very long history of understanding about animal welfare, of care about animals, of legislation about animal welfare. We still have lots and lots of animals that are abandoned and treated cruelly every single day. And, and yet I would say the majority of people care hugely about animals. So it's not something that's, it's not a short process. It's something that takes time, and it does require quite a lot of patience, and it does require a lot of being able to be non-judgmental if you want to actually, move in and help people, as Jill has already pointed out, to see that there are other options. A lot of the time, we were talking about this the other day, that you see people cuddling their animals, their working animals, for example, their horses, their mules. You'll see little children with their arms around them, cuddling them and being very affectionate to them. And yet as soon as they get behind them to drive them when they're carrying heavy loads, they'll be using a whip or a poke or something, because that's the way it's done. And they don't seem to understand that actually there are other options, that that's not the way it needs to be done. So that was my point, really, I think.
Well, interestingly, I read that question completely differently from you two.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. I don't know what that says.
Well, yeah, what does that say about
me?
Fritha?
But so I read it as Ilyas possibly pondering on using the skills that he's gained on animal welfare principles and animal welfare assessment on humans to understand the problems that humans might be facing and the way in which we deal with those problems.
So we, deep question.
Well, it is.
It's got us thinking on many different levels here, Ilyas.
Oftentimes we will think about punishing humans, for example, for doing bad things, and yet we've been saying about learning behaviour and how we should use positive reinforcement for to produce a safe and good learning environment for animals.
And we're not good at doing
so
that with
we
humans.
often don't do that
No,
with humans.
no.
We often don't do that with our own children.
No, we're very good at saying no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're very, very quick at doing the opposite to what we would do and what we would advise in animals. So I think that's very interesting. And yes, not a lot of people around the world don't have their 5 needs looked after, or their 5 freedoms.
That's important.
And so, you know, human welfare is extraordinarily important as well. We are all another dominant animal in the world, of course. And you know, there are an awful lot of people out there who suffer.
It's getting the balance
Yeah, and
right.
if we want to try and improve the life of animals, we ultimately have to improve the life of the humans as well. And it comes back to what we've been saying for 5 weeks, 6 weeks now.
Yes.
You know, it's one world, one health.
Not that I want to always bring it back to chickens, although I feel like
I've chickens, don't you?
been speaking a lot about chickens this week. I don't know very much about chickens. I should stop speaking about chickens. But
if you want to know more about chickens, there is a MOOC running at the moment on chickens.
And it starts in 2 weeks' time, I think.
Yeah, poultry welfare.
Yeah, but anyway, to bring it back to chickens, one of the harder jobs in the world is the people who go out and collect broiler chickens from broiler houses to put them into lorries, trucks to go off to slaughter. It's not a very nice job. But there's been recent research to suggest that if you treat those people that collect the chickens as real human beings, funnily enough, if you give them a place to go and put a kettle and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and you value them properly and you pay them a good wage, and that you don't expect them to be instantly responding to an on-call call out, so they have to go and get chickens immediately in the middle of the night. If you treat them more like decent human beings, then they treat the animals better.
Yeah.
So it's always this continuum of human welfare and animal welfare, and I think you really can't tease apart these two. So that's how I would answer it, Ilyas. So I think
that's not how I read that. Yeah,
no, it's funny, isn't it? But there we go. But it's a really, really interesting question. So thanks for that.
Right, we're running out of time now, and you know, it's really sweet because we've had a comment about how much these hangouts will be missed. And we'll miss you all too. You know, although it'd be quite nice to have Friday afternoons doing other things, I have to say, but it's been a joy actually, and I'm sure there's lots and lots of questions that we could keep on asking, and there's lovely questions from Valerie again about how kids can spread awareness and how rising populations and new technology will create welfare problems. But we won't sort of linger too much, because I think both of those questions are good. Kids do need to spread awareness, and indeed, I think where you see more people and a lot more reliance on technology, there's the potential for a lot more animal welfare problems, and so we have to be. But
at the same time, technology can help solve. So you can see,
just like this MOOC is helping, hopefully. So yes, so I think we should basically say thank you all very, very much for being such great MOOC people, and hopefully we'll get the chance to meet some of you in our normal lives when we're going around the world. And and
if you ever do see your names somewhere, do come and say that you did do the MOOC and that you enjoyed it, or just give us your feedback, because we do like hearing from you. And I know I've been saying this for the last 6 Hangouts, but if you do enjoy these and you are watching them on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, remember to like those YouTube videos, to share them, and to subscribe to the YouTube channel. The more you do that, the more YouTube will suggest our videos to other people, our other videos like Street Dog, for example. And so the animal welfare message gets out further to more and more people. So that is one thing you could do as a member of the public, is to distribute our message further to other people. As you can tell, it's quite late on a Friday afternoon now, and I'm starting to lose the power of speech.
I hope that you all enjoyed the eclipse today.
Yes,
it was cloudy here. We couldn't see
it. Was only in Northern Europe. So anybody outside of Northern Europe
we hadn't seen
it, but we had an eclipse here. It was too cloudy. We
saw
dark, a little bit dark and cold.
All right. On that note, bye bye.
So, bye bye.